So I get asked why Pukwudgies a lot, and the truth is the answer is quite complicated, and I've only really begun to fully understand it. I've told some stories on interviews on other channels, but more has happened since then. I figured out some more, and it's still evolving. But I figured today I'd tell the story here, and you can enjoy the Susie cam from the walk I took in Valley Falls Nature Preserve in Vernon, Connecticut this morning. So Pukwudgies were prevalent in my childhood. My father is from Fall River, which is right near Freetown State Forest, which you've heard me talk about before. They were kind of used as boogeymen to scare us into good behavior. But in 2013, when they came out with the Bridgewater Triangle documentary, they talked about Pukwudgies in that, and they had the interview with Bill Russo, who I've also interviewed here, and that kind of reawakened my obsession with them. So my son was young at the time, but I started to do, the basic internet searches. But I immediately got pretty frustrated with that. There wasn't a lot of information, and the information that there was didn't make any sense. You had these eyewitness sightings that were very chill, except, people are freaked out because they're seeing something strange and unexplainable. But nothing ever bad happens. Yeah, all of the lore is that they are scary and dangerous and demons even, which we know how I feel about that. So, I started to deep dive it more. But you can't look into Pukwudgies without looking into the Bridgewater Triangle, and you can't look into the Bridgewater Triangle without looking into King Philip's War. And that's where it kind of became more personal to me. So if you go back in my videos, I did one about Anawan Rock. What I didn't talk about in that video was when I had first learned that story, I said, what kind of absolute monster of a person could do this? But everything I could find just said it was an official from Plymouth. I ended up going to Boston Library, where I found a name finally, and that name was Governor Thomas Hinckley. This is significant because he is my 9th grade uncle. And if you know the Wampum Belt curse story of Bridgewater Triangle, he would basically be part of setting that into motion. Now, I don't believe in the Wampum Belt curse for a lot of reasons we're not here to talk about today. But it was a very strange coincidence for sure. I didn't exactly cope well. I took it hard. But, as I started to process it, basically how I coped with it was by learning more about King Philip's War, learning more about the Wampanoag people and the history of New England, the land that I live on. So while I am, off on this, we'll call it a side quest, I start having nightmares. And the nightmares are in this one particular house in my hometown. It was a house that actually exists. I had, figured my brain had just picked a house from my memory. But in the dream, when I go to leave this house, I get in my car and someone had stolen my transmission. And when I go to the nice old lady who owned the house for help, she starts screaming at me and telling me that I can't leave and I'm stuck there forever. And I try to run away, and she has her 2 farm hands grab me. And the dream ends there. But I kept having this. Every couple of days, sometimes it would be like 3 nights in a row that I'd have the dream. So I ended up calling my mother to ask her about the house in the dream. And she says, "Oh, yeah, I know that house. That's the house your grandmother grew up in." And she goes on to say that the woman that I described sounds exactly like my great grandmother. My mother is not one to play into my woo-ness. So this was strange and out of character. But she lives in Florida. She mailed me a picture of my great grandmother and her Bible. And when it came, I looked at the picture, and that was 100% the woman from my dreams. So at the time, I am thinking that, my great grandmother's ghost is angry with me and trying to contact me, send me some sort of message. I start looking into my grandmother's family history because I never knew anything about that. She only ever talked about my grandfather's family, which is strange. But I did find out that my grandmother was actually 3 months pregnant when she got married, which I never knew. They went on to have 12 other kids, so 13 in total. So I don't think, in the grand scheme of things, it made any difference. They had a very long marriage and they're actually happy. But from what my mother says, my great grandmother was never around, even though she only lived a few miles away. Um, what I think is that they had a falling out because my grandmother got pregnant before she got married. My great grandmother seems to be extremely religious, so she would not have liked that. I also found some newspaper articles that my great grandfather was sued by his cousin because the house that they lived in, she had deeded to him with the understanding he would take care of her until she died. She was elderly. And he went back on that. And in the article, it says in court, the cousin said that the bone of contention, exact words, was my great grandmother. So she apparently was not a very nice person. There's also a follow up article that they never paid her the money the judge ordered them. So she sued them again. So that was a great bit of history there. Um, and I had these dreams on and off for a couple of years. Every time the dreams are on, I also have things that start to go missing and then never reappear or will reappear in the middle of a room out of nowhere. And it's always things that are not life or death, but are important to my everyday life, like my earbuds or all of my mascara. So it was making me feel like I was going crazy, is what that was doing. Now, fast forward a couple of years, I am in a small shop about 25 minutes from my house. I hear this other woman ask this man if he was indigenous, and he said, "Yes, I'm Wampanoag." And I start talking to this man, introduce myself, explain my family history a little bit. And we get to talking, and we find out that my ninth grade uncle murdered his ninth great grandfather. And he was great about it. He pointed me in the right direction to get more information and to learn more. Took me to Hockomock to see some sites and, some other sites that were important during King Philip's War. Great learning experience. I never would have been able to learn half of the things I have if it wasn't for him. But a very weird coincidence. He was over 2 hours from his home, and we just happened to be in the same shop at the same time. A lot of things like that have happened. A lot of synchronicities, strange coincidences, kind of left and right. That was one of the more significant ones. Um, but a couple months ago, I finally worked up the nerve to go to the house from the dreams. And another strange coincidence that I've had actually is I met the next door neighbor to this house, and come to find out no one's lived there for years. it's in the type of condition that probably no one's ever going to live there again. And he said, you know, it wouldn't be a problem at all. You could park on my property and go over. No one would care. So I worked up the nerve finally. I drove out there. Just going to my hometown is anxiety inducing for me. So it kind of took a lot. But I finally did it. I pull up to the house. I'm sitting in my car for a while, working up the nerve. I get out, I take a picture, and I smell smoke. There was some kind of small outbuilding, like a shed in the backyard that had collapsed and somehow caught fire. And um, I had to call the fire department and all that. So I kind of took that as a sign, like not, it was not meant for me to go in that house. But that was, you know, probably the biggest thing that's happened. But I kind of feel like I've been constantly sent down wild goose chases, thinking that I would finally get some kind of answer or resolution to all this, and I never do. When this first started, I honestly thought it was the ghost of my great grandmother angry at me. Now I feel like something new, that the way to motivate a redhead is through anger, and that if it had something to do with my grandmother, because she is my favorite person of all time, it would instantly get my attention, and it would be able to use that to manipulate me and possibly distract me. So that's the way I feel about it now. Um, if you watched my recent video on the Great Swamp Massacre Monument, that was another incident of finding out about murderous ancestors from someone whose ancestors were murdered by them. So it's very interesting. I still don't know quite what to make of it, but I do feel like this is some kind of attachment that has something to do with my family, because everything that has come out of this has been learning about my family in one way or another, whether I wanted to or not. So that's where we are today. I don't really think I even scratched the surface, but it gives you a good idea of where we've come from, where we are, and how we got here. So at this point, I'm just not playing into it anymore. I am going to do what I feel like I should be doing and not what I feel like something else wants me to do. And I am going to keep sitting by streams, asking the water spirits questions, as corny as that sounds, and just learning as much as I can.